I have access to online, I believe you do as well. It's a book of instructions, formation to help us grow spiritually. It's very heavy. There were 3 chapters that I was assigned for the presentation today, and it's about the passive purification that takes place in us as we continue the journey of faith and spiritual growth and development. And it's broken into sections. So I'll try to give the heading for each of them. You almost need a dictionary to understand all of the terminology. It's very, very heavy. So the first section is entitled The Transluminous Obscurity. Trans meaning change or movement, luminous meaning light, obscurity not always recognizable immediately. And speaks of, in terms of God, spirituality and so forth, as a great light. And it can give the impression of darkness. If you ever look directly at a light bulb, or the sun, although you shouldn't do that, but there can be, if you look away then, there's like black spots. And it's misleading. And that's one of the difficulties or the challenges in the spiritual life, that there can be a number of things that are misleading. As we deepen our relationship with our Lord, there are other messages that come to us that sometimes are contrary to what is really happening. So you get into that obscurity. It seems that one thing is happening, but in reality, other things, good things, may be happening there. The effect of too great a light is that there's simply more than the eye, the physical eye that we have, can absorb. But beyond that, of course, it's symbolic of the heart and the soul, the mind. There's just more that we can take in. We're overwhelmed. Like going to a museum that has one gallery after another, after another, after another. And it can easily happen that we can go to a place like the Smithsonian that's just endless, it's cavernous. And we come out of it and say, well, that was nice, but we almost can't remember anything. What I've been trying to do in more recent years when going to such a place, to focus on something specific and ponder that a little bit and maybe read about it if there's something there, and get your phone out and go to the internet and get more information about it right there, and look and study so that you come away with something rather than you're just being overwhelmed. And sometimes the light of Christ, we think of that, is just sometimes too much for us to comprehend. And there again, there can be that confusing message that I must be doing something wrong, that I'm not getting it. Everybody else seems to be doing well. Why am I not doing well? So there can be that tendency that we're just overwhelmed, and it leads us into a darkness which is misleading. The effect of light on weak eyes, and there again, we're not talking just about the eyes in our head, but the eyes of faith. We need to adjust to bright light or to dim light. And we're aware that particularly at nighttime, if you go into a place that's dark. I was recently at a small chapel in a church away from here. And when I first went in, it was very dark. I could barely see. Well, the longer I was there, it was much easier to see. And it wasn't real bright as it is in here. But initially, I kind of had to grope around a little bit. It was a small enclosure. But then gradually, my eyes adjusted to that. And so we have to allow ourselves that time to adjust. And that it gets into pondering, and that's one of the statements in the scriptures, that Mary pondered things in her heart. She didn't always understand everything, but she pondered them, she thought about them. The fear of consenting or having consented to temptations is a difficulty as well. And it uses the example of kind of a tunnel, walking through a tunnel, and there can be that fear that we're not getting anywhere, we're not progressing, and we don't see the light at the end, even though we know that it's there, and so we may have to, again, allow ourselves to adjust to that darkness that's sort of enveloping us, and knowing that if we entered the tunnel through an opening, that there's a similar opening at the other end, even though we may not see it. It might be a shorter one, but thinking of kind of a longer passageway there. There again, in terms of the spiritual life, that we are enveloped sometimes in scary situations or in darkness. But we kind of continue on trusting and knowing and believing there is an end to that. And that can occur in the course of the things of life that can just overwhelm us. And it seems as though we're on the wrong road. It's necessary to continue forward, trusting that there will be an end to that. And there are a number of spiritual exercises for various people through the ages that have spoken of the ebb and the flow of consolation and desolation, of light and peace and darkness and almost despair at times. And that when you're in one period, you kind of keep in mind that there will be a time of light, and when you're in a time of light, that you kind of keep balance, that you don't become arrogant or boastful about that there will be another time of struggle. Confirmations to those good things, illumination of the soul may be subtle, as in the transition from daylight to nighttime. You're out driving, or you're just out and about, or you're in your home and kind of look out, and now that we're back in standard time, and it's bright out, and then you happen to be consciously aware of looking out, it's getting darker, and then all of a sudden it's much darker, and it's happening kind of gradually in us. And so also the illumination comes, and I think we have to be careful that we're not comparing ourselves too much with other people, and that we look at others and the person is so much more advanced than I am. A little bit of that goes a long way. We have to be very, very cautious of that and allow ourselves to experience that illumination, that we're actually able to absorb more, or comprehend more, or process more than we realize. Using the image of daytime to nighttime, when you allow yourself then in a dark environment outside, particularly where there aren't a lot of street lights and things like that, if you can find such a place, once you adjust to that and you look up, you're able to see stars, assuming it's not cloudy. You're able to see further into the distance at nighttime than you can in the daytime. And it almost seems contradictory when you think about that. When you look up in the sky today and there's no clouds, you just see sky. You really don't see anything else up there other than it's blue or it's pretty. Or if there are clouds, you can see them. But they're not. They're kind of within reach. I mean, they're not light years away. But at nighttime, we don't realize it, but we're seeing things that are millions of miles away. And so also in in the spiritual life, we're able to see through, in the midst of the struggle and the difficulty, we're able to see things that otherwise we might not be able to, given the grace of Christ, the grace of God, the life of God living in us. So there can be that, again, that misleading kind of thing that we're lost, or that we're in darkness, or nothing's happening. When Jesus walked with the disciples, they saw him physically. When he left, went to the Father through the ascension and so forth, they were then able to begin to grasp his divinity, which was the source of their opportunity to enter into greater life with the Trinity. So there was kind of a restriction. The physical has its limitations. The divine does not. But initially they were distraught. The road to Emmaus kind of thing. They're walking along and they're kind of sad. And he's with them. What's happening? They begin to recount things. And gradually there's illumination then. They begin to understand. But it takes a while. So also with us, it takes a while. We need to be patient with that process. So they couldn't really comprehend while seeing him in his humanity, because they were kind of just immersed in that. But then once he was gone, and I don't leave you orphan, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, there's that illumination then, that they're really able to see more clearly, just as when we go outside in the dark night, we're able to see much further at nighttime in reality than we can in daytime. Now the stars are there in the daytime too, but there's no contrast. So we can't pick them up. Some of the planets, I guess, you can see at different times. The next section is the conduct to be observed during the purification of the spirit. Some of these titles in themselves are enough to put you to sleep. But to be able to have a generous acceptance of that purifying light it's a gift of understanding, which enables the connecting of dots. We're able to put things together. We're able to weave them into the fabric of our lives. Individually, they might seem meaningless. They might seem unnecessary, confusing. How's it all fit together? But with understanding, then we're able to see how they fit together. And there again, that takes time. And it doesn't typically happen immediately. It's a process. Someone who is making something in terms of crocheting or sewing or whatever, quilting, you have all the individual pieces and so forth. And gradually then it comes together and it forms something that's beautiful and something that's useful, and people take delight in that, and there's a pattern to it. But initially, when it's all in pieces and so forth, it's just sort of helter-skelter. So gradually it comes together. So we're able to see that process, and we're able to put it together. I like to make the distinction between information and inspiration. Information we get on the internet, information we get from a book. The inspiration allows us then to make sense of it. How does that impact me? What does that mean to me? How does that affect me? How can I use that information in a productive kind of way? How does it further good things in this world? That generous acceptance allows us to not to have a lot of expectations, other than that that there is good in what can be happening. And then there can be a struggle in the spiritual life and aridity and so forth. So that expectations can get us into difficulty because we have programmed in our mind that something is going to work out this way or that way, and then it doesn't, and then we're disappointed, and then sometimes it's buried, and I must be doing something wrong, and on it goes. I speak to people about grief, death of a loved one, and there can often be expectations in that by this point in time, I'm going to feel good. Can't program it that way. Go into it with the expectation that in time, and with your effort and your hard work and your reflection, your pondering, your remembering, and everything else, there will be a time of consolation. But initially, and that initial, it doesn't have a time frame, it can be very confusing, it can be very difficult. And once again, people will often compare themselves with others, and particularly if their spouse or their relatives or their close friends or whatever. Everybody else seems to be doing fine with the fact that so-and-so has died, and I feel rotten and miserable. I must be doing something wrong. Well, there again, what seems is not always the case. And it seems our society likes to program it, and by a month or by 6 months or by a year, then we're over it, and we're fine and we're wonderful. And it's not uncommon in talking to people where there is grief that you ask about the person, and when did that person die? And they might say 10 years ago. And in our society, the response could be, and you're still acting like this? Maybe they've never been given the opportunity to feel and to experience grief. Some people want to not deal with it. Sort of, I'm not going to think about the person. My response to that is that working? And typically I don't have anything to say to that, because it's not working. So it needs to be a balance in that kind of thing. So you sort of use that as an example there of a generous acceptance of what is going on in our lives spiritually, that there are a lot of expectations that we place on ourselves or on others, but to kind of move forward. People that are in Alcoholics Anonymous and all of those kinds of related groups and therapies and supports, environments and so forth, where you are along the steps and so forth really doesn't matter. The fact that you're there does matter. In the spiritual life, we may look at somebody else and they've progressed a great deal. Why haven't I progressed? Don't worry about that. Be happy that you're on the journey. And if that, in that journey, being on step one or whatever it might be, is working and that's helping you, then that's a great blessing. You don't need to try to catch up with, because it may not be appropriate for you at that point. Having faith in the mystery of the cross, that St. Paul speaks of power made perfect in infirmity. When I am weakest, I am strongest. There seems to be a contradiction there, but in reality, that often happens. I, again, have said to many people in the midst of various kinds of struggles that they're having, that they feel weak. In reality, they're strong. A person who comes to confession and opens up and pours out their heart and soul, many times they see that as weakness. I always say to them, it takes tremendous strength and courage to be able to honestly say, this is my struggle, this is my cross, this is my challenge in life. Do you know why Pharaoh would not let the Israelites leave Egypt? He was in denial.
That was good.
That's one of the little jokes also in the AA circles, that denial is not a river in Egypt.
Yeah.
So faith in the mystery of the cross, that there is something beyond that. There's hope beyond that. And keeping that focus, that it strengthens us. It doesn't weaken us. The firm hope and constant prayer. Constant prayer is certainly important. Prayer enables us to see as God sees, to be able to see ourselves as he sees us, to see others and the world around us as he sees it, and to respond accordingly. Pope Francis, and others as well, I mean, he doesn't have a monopoly on this, and you read other popes and other spiritual people from ages past, the similar kinds of things that they've said and written, to be able to see the world through the eyes of the poor. Jesus certainly had special care given and attention to the poor, the powerless, the voiceless, the ones that were kept to the periphery of society, the ones who were ignored, the ones who were pushed away. Those are the ones that he reached out to so often. And to be able to see the world through their eyes gives us a different kind of insight. So to be firm in that hope and constant prayer, that we're praying not only when we feel like praying, but we're praying even when we don't feel like praying. And sometimes we feel that we're only going through the motions. It's okay to do that. It's okay to experience that. It's not okay to stop praying because it doesn't feel as though anything. Faith, prayer and faith, that comes from the intellect. It doesn't come from the emotions. We pray only when we feel like it. We probably won't pray too often. The love of conformity and of submission to God's good pleasure. We don't like the word submission in our society. We don't like to submit to anyone. But the text that I was reading was made reference to the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who are humble and meek and pure in heart and peacemakers and so on and so forth. I like to take the word beatitude and separate a little bit. Attitudes to have. Be attitudes. This is the way to think, to kind of program yourself to thinking in this fashion, that there is blessing there. There is goodness in the midst of those struggles. We say at the beginning of the gospel, quietly, Lord, be in my mind. Lord, be in my attitudes. Lord, be in my thinking, in my choices, in my decisions. Let me be able to think spontaneously and respond spontaneously as you would in your good time and pleasure. The effects of the passive purification, and when we're passive to something, it's sort of happening in us. We're not necessarily conscious of it, and we're conscious, but we're not aware that it's happening. Sometimes people use the expression that they're unconscious of something. Well, if we're unconscious, then we're not awake. We're sleeping or whatever. Medically, what would that be? We're kind of out of it. So I think it more in terms of just unaware that what's happening there as opposed to unconscious or subconscious. It's something sort of happening behind the scenes, but we're not necessarily aware of it. And the spiritual life and spiritual growth, we're not always aware of it, but it's happening. It's still taking place there. So the effects of that passive purification of the spirit in relation to the gifts, the theological gifts of faith, hope, and charity are important for us to ponder. It leads to a deeper awareness of God's mercy and presence, but experiencing it as we can by our challenges. What is our response to that? It's not that just that it's happening, but how do we respond to those instances where there is some struggle, some difficulty, something happening. My mom always used to say to us, we didn't like to hear it said at the time that it was always said, don't panic, adjust. And there's a lot of wisdom to that. We would want to panic. We want to get into a frenzy. We want to get annoyed. We want to get angry, whatever. Don't panic, adjust. So when she's 90 and I'm 50 and she's a resident in a nursing home and she would begin to get agitated about something, Mom, don't panic, adjust. She would look at me and smile and she said, you're getting even, aren't you? Yes. Negative effects, and that was a section that I was confused about when I was speaking with Mary about that just when I came in, because in the section, I printed it out, I read it over and over and over. It doesn't seem that the text fits the caption, negative effects, but except maybe that we become sort of apathetic to people who come to us in need, and we're not attentive to them. And that's the only thing that I could figure, because it's saying the effects are visible in the progressive disappearance of distractions, dullness of spirit, the need for external satisfaction, finding consolation, self-love, all that gradually dissipate. Well, those are good things. We want that to happen. We want to be more aware of others. We don't want to be conceited and arrogant and so forth. So, not exactly sure in that particular section what they're driving at, but it was a little bit confusing to me. The positive effects of this purification can prompt us to probe beyond the surface of the soul. Just as you would in the construction of a building, you don't just put it right on the surface, even if it doesn't have a basement. You ever see these places where they're building something? It just seems for days, for weeks, they're just pushing dirt around. And they're moving it. There's a pile of dirt over here on this day, and then next week the pile of dirt is over there, and it's just like they're just moving it back and forth, and nothing seems to be happening. But there is a lot happening. So also in the spiritual life, there seems like we're shuffling things around, and nothing's taking place. But we need that firm foundation. Now, if it's a real big building, then it needs a deeper and foundation and pilings and all that kind of stuff in order to keep it upright and secure and so forth. But even if it's just on there's no basement, there still has to be a foundation to it, and so that takes some extra time and effort to put all of that together. And the purification of the virtue of faith. Again, faith springs from the intellect. We've got to keep that in mind. It's not based on how I feel, on my emotions. It's much deeper than that. It's much more solid than that. There's emotions coming up. And what my emotion to something can be very different than your emotion to something. But faith is a much more secure kind of thing. And it's important for us to keep that in mind. And we'll hear that sometimes in ourselves, we'll hear that from other people, that they feel this way, they feel that way. I feel like God doesn't love me. But what do you know in your heart? What is your intellect? What is your conscience speaking to you at that point? And that can be very different. And trying to get people to see that, and see ourselves to see that as well. That there's a deeper reality taking place there. And faith allows us to believe in the goodness of God, the power of God, even when our emotions and everything are saying contradictory things. Purification of hope. I'd like you to stand up. Part of those words. I don't want you to need to hold on to something, that's all right. First, we have to get up.
Good.
So if you're physically capable of doing this, fine. If you need to hold on, that's all right. But I just want you to lean. And you just kind of lean, you know, forward a little bit, lean back a little bit. Don't lose your balance. Lean to the sides, whatever. You know, you can, if you had something more secure, I could really lean into it. And that's what hope is. Kind of have it, leaning toward God, having an orientation toward God, and to His love, to His mercy, that your life is directed in that fashion. There again, temptation or the evil one wants us to go the other direction, but hope, purification by hope, that leaning in. Now you can sit down. When we're in conversation with somebody, body language can speak a lot. And if a person is literally leaning in, now sometimes it might be because they can't hear you, but just, I mean, typically people that are attentive, and they're, you know, I watched in your group and so forth, we're talking to one another, you're kind of leaning in, and that indicates a desire to hear, to engage in, as opposed to this kind of thing, which is the opposite. It's like you're disinterested, or you know, you're looking at your clock and so forth, and wondering when is this going to be over. So that virtue of hope is I think simply just kind of a desire to, a tendency, a spontaneity to kind of lean in toward the presence of God, the mercy of God. And it seems to me just a simple way. The purification of charity, obviously, to be disposed toward others, to love God simply because God is lovable. He has created us. He has created the world. Charity is a holy friendship in which we give back to God the love He has for us by love for neighbor. To love God with your whole heart, mind, and soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. And who is my neighbor? We get into those questions, and that can be kind of frightening at times. Who is my neighbor? And then Jesus would tell the story of the Samaritan, and it was the man who fell in with robbers, and was the most unlikely person who responded to him. So also in our lives, it can be the most unlikely, the most unexpected, the most improbable instant situation. There again, and so we go with that expectation that those kinds of things can happen, that we can be attentive to them, asking our guardian angels to remind us when they're there, and to be aware of that, and to be responsive to that, and to recognize that's the hand of God in those situations. It's not happening just by chance. There's a plan there. Mary and Joseph on the journey to Jerusalem, and she's pregnant. Was it just accidental that they ended up in Bethlehem? I don't think so. I think it was all according to God's plan, because the word Bethlehem means house of bread. Jesus, the bread of life, is born in the town that means house of bread. And so there was no room in Jerusalem. The inns were all full. They had to go elsewhere. I don't think that's accidental. I think it was all according to God's plan. Joseph and Mary, being the people that they were, and a deep spirituality, were able to lean into and not become all annoyed with that, but just kind of, in a sense, go with the flow, but see the hand of God even in those things where I'm sure it was disappointing that they couldn't find a place, but they did find a place. But it was all according to God's plan, being able to accept that. The sufferings that sometimes accompany the purification of the spirit is that we can meet up with rejection, with misunderstanding. There can be undue criticism, fear of not having anyone to confide in. Some of the saints in their writings, they would be struggling with different things, and there was a fear then that if they went and talked to their confessor, their confidant, their spiritual director, their friend, whomever, that they would be rejected or criticized, or what's wrong with you, or you're crazy, or you're imagining things, or whatever, rather than someone who is willing to listen and to be able to just listen attentively, to sort of lean in and listen attentively to what's going on. So there can be a temptation that God's not merciful. A person that's depressed can easily inadvertently not reach out to people because they don't want to bother anybody. They don't want to wake the person up, even though people have said, if you ever need me, call anytime, day or night, just call me. And I'm willing. But when we're depressed, we're just not thinking as clearly at that point. And then we'll start putting those limitations. Well, it's late at night, or the person that is just they're going through some difficulty, or I don't want to bother them. I don't want to put more burden on them. I don't want to be a nuisance, and so forth. And if people say to us, or we say to someone, I want to be bothered, there again, God doesn't have a schedule, so we can go to him at any time and bring our prayers and our concerns and so forth. So there's a need to trust that some, again, the unexpected, the simple, the casual way that God will break through are the doubts and the fears and dispel any darkness that we have. And there again, you get back to the light then, that there will be that light that will illuminate, that will give us the insight, the inspiration that we need to know how to respond to the things that are going on around us. De Chloris.